15. Natural disasters ranked from least to most destructive. Imagine waking up to a sky that has turned the wrong color. Not storm gray, not overcast, something darker, something that feels permanent, like the sun itself has decided to stop participating. For 18 consecutive months, crops across 3 continents fail simultaneously. Rivers run with ash, summers arrive without warmth. Children born in those years never learn what a shadow looks like, because for a year and a half, there are no shadows. There is no light strong enough to make one. And that is not the worst one on this list. Today, we are counting down 15 of the most destructive natural disasters in the history of this planet, ranked not just by death toll, but by the depth of their scar on human civilization. Some of these you know. Some of them you have studied in school, seen in documentaries, read about in textbooks. Those entries will not make the top 5. The events waiting for you at the bottom of this countdown operate on a scale that makes our familiar disasters look like footnotes. They are events that ended civilizations, altered coastlines, collapsed empires, and in one case, one specific documented, scientifically verified case came within a few thousand survivors of erasing the entire human species from the face of the Earth. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly what happened, exactly how close we came, and exactly why the ground beneath your feet is not the stable, reliable surface you have always assumed it to be. We start at number 15. Before we begin, you need to understand how this ranking works, because if we ranked purely by death toll, we would miss the point entirely. This countdown measures destructive impact across 5 dimensions: total lives lost, percentage of the local population killed, long-term civilizational consequences, geographic scale of the physical destruction, and the duration of the damage. An earthquake that kills 100,000 people in a single city may score lower than a slower catastrophe that kills 1 million across a decade, because scale matters, and so does permanence. With that established, let us begin. Number 15. The 2010 Haiti earthquake, January 12, 2010, Caribbean Sea. At 4:53 in the afternoon on January 12, 2010, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake struck Haiti along the Enriquillo-Plantain Garden Fault System, with an epicenter just 16 kilometers southwest of Port-au-Prince. The shaking lasted approximately 35 seconds. In those 35 seconds, an estimated 160,000 people were killed. Another 300,000 were injured. 1.5 million people lost their homes entirely. What made this earthquake catastrophically destructive beyond its magnitude was the near-total collapse of the infrastructure meant to respond to it. Hospitals fell. Government buildings fell. The National Palace, the symbolic center of the state, collapsed in on itself. Search and rescue coordination had no headquarters to operate from because the headquarters itself was rubble. Haiti was already the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere before that afternoon. After it, the country's GDP infrastructure was destroyed by an estimated 60% in under a minute. The international response was massive. More than 200 countries and organizations contributed aid, but the damage was so fundamental that 15 years later, its effects remain visible in the city's unfinished reconstruction. This is our baseline. 160,000 lives. A nation's foundation cracked through. The 5th most deadly earthquake of the 21st century so far. Remember this number. In a few minutes, the events on this list will make it feel almost small. Number 14. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, September 1st, 1923, Japan. At exactly 2 minutes before noon on September 1st, 1923, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake struck the Kanto plain of Japan at the worst possible moment of the day. It was lunchtime. Across the region, millions of families were cooking over open flames. When the shaking started, those flames were knocked loose, and in the densely packed wooden structures of Tokyo and Yokohama, they found unlimited fuel. The earthquake killed tens of thousands directly. The fires that followed killed far more. Firestorms consumed entire neighborhoods. In one particularly devastating incident, 40,000 people who had taken refuge in a single open plaza were overtaken by a fire tornado, a column of superheated, spinning air that incinerated the crowd in minutes. When the chaos finally ended, approximately 142,000 people were dead. Both Tokyo and Yokohama, the two largest cities in Japan, had been functionally destroyed. The Great Kanto earthquake sits at number 14, not because its death toll is higher than Haiti's, it is slightly lower, but because of what it destroyed. The obliteration of Japan's two greatest cities at once set the nation on a political trajectory that would shape the next 2 decades of Asian history. The economic devastation contributed to conditions of instability that historians trace through a long chain of consequences all the way to 1941. A single geological event, a single autumn morning, and the geopolitical course of the 20th century bends. Number 13, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, December 26, 2004, Indian Ocean. On the morning of December 26, 2004, the day after Christmas, the ocean floor off the northwestern coast of Sumatra ruptured along a fault line approximately 1,500 kilometers long. The rupture took 8 to 10 minutes. In geological terms, it was nearly instantaneous. In terms of energy released, it was equivalent to approximately 23,000 atomic bombs. The magnitude 9.1 seismic event was the 3rd largest earthquake ever recorded in human history. The tsunami it generated crossed the Indian Ocean in every direction, at speeds approaching 800 kilometers per hour. It struck the coast of Aceh, Indonesia, within 20 minutes. It struck Sri Lanka 2 hours later. It struck the east coast of Africa more than 7 hours after the earthquake, and it still killed people there. The final death toll across 14 countries reached approximately 227,000 people. More than 174,000 of them died in Indonesia alone. Nearly 2 million people were displaced. What placed this disaster at number 13, above Haiti and the Great Kanto earthquake, was its scale across sovereign borders, its total destruction of entire coastal ecosystems, and the sheer geographic footprint of a single event, killing people on 2 separate continents. The ocean erased coastlines that took decades to partially restore. Some communities have never returned. Number 12, the 1970 Bola cyclone, November 12th to 13th, 1970. East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. In November 1970, the most powerful tropical cyclone ever recorded to make landfall struck what was then called East Pakistan, a low-lying, densely populated delta region where the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna rivers flow into the Bay of Bengal. The storm made landfall on the night of November 12th, driving a wall of water up to 10 meters high directly into the coastline. There was no modern warning system. There were no evacuation routes. There was no elevated infrastructure to flee to. The death toll from the Bola cyclone is estimated between 300,000 and 500,000 people in a single night. The response from the central Pakistani government in the distant western part of the country was so inadequate, so widely perceived as deliberate indifference, that it became a direct catalyst for the Bangladesh Liberation War. Within a year, East Pakistan had declared independence, triggering a conflict that would kill hundreds of thousands more. A natural disaster became a political breaking point. A storm produced a nation. This is why the Bola cyclone sits at number 12, not just because of its staggering death toll, but because it changed the map of the world. And we are just getting started. What waits further down this list will challenge everything you think you know about what natural disasters are capable of. We are now in the portion of this countdown where the familiar disasters have fallen away, and we begin encountering events that most people have never heard of. Events that killed more people than anything in the previous section, yet somehow receive a fraction of the cultural memory. This is partly a function of when they happened, partly a function of where they happened, and partly a function of something more uncomfortable, that the scale of human suffering past a certain threshold becomes difficult to process. The numbers become abstractions, and abstractions do not hold attention the way individual stories do. We are going to resist that. Every entry from here forward has a specific geography, a specific mechanism, and a specific human cost that deserves to be understood in full. Number 11. The 1976 Tangshan earthquake, July 28, 1976, China. At 3:42 in the morning on July 28, 1976, the city of Tangshan in northeastern China was struck by a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. The city was home to approximately 1 million people. Nearly all of them were asleep. The official death toll, released by the Chinese government at the time, was 242,000 people. Independent researchers and seismologists who later gained access to the records believe the true figure was closer to 655,000, making it potentially the deadliest earthquake of the 20th century and possibly one of the 5 deadliest in recorded history. The gap between those numbers is not a rounding error. It is a deliberate political suppression. The Tangshan earthquake occurred during one of the most politically sensitive periods of the Cultural Revolution, and the government chose to manage the narrative of the disaster as aggressively as it managed the disaster itself. What the numbers cannot fully capture is the completeness of the destruction. Tangshan, as it existed on the morning of July 27, 1976, effectively ceased to exist by the morning of July 28th. Entire neighborhoods were flattened to a depth of rubble that search and rescue teams spent weeks trying to penetrate without machinery, because the earthquake had also destroyed the infrastructure needed to bring machinery in. At number 11 on this list, the Tangshan earthquake sits not only as a human catastrophe, but as a case study in what happens when institutional suppression follows natural destruction. The hidden death toll makes it one of the least understood disasters of the 20th century, which is extraordinary given its probable scale. Number 10. The 1920 Haiyuan earthquake, December 16, 1920, China. In the early evening of December 16, 1920, a magnitude 7.8 to 8.5 earthquake, estimates vary, struck Haiyuan County in the Gansu province of northwestern China. What distinguished this earthquake from others of comparable magnitude was the secondary destruction it caused. The Loess Plateau of northwestern China is composed of a loose, fine-grained sediment called loess, a material that is remarkably stable under normal conditions and catastrophically unstable when shaken. The earthquake liquefied the plateau's surface across an enormous area, triggering the largest earthquake-induced landslides in recorded history. Entire villages were not buried by falling buildings. They were buried by the land itself. Hillsides moved horizontally, flowing like slow water, covering towns under meters of sediment. Thousands of people survived the initial earthquake, only to be swallowed whole by the earth in the minutes that followed. The final death toll was approximately 273,000 people. Scholars examining the regional records note that many smaller communities were so completely buried that their populations were never counted. They were simply absent. and their absence was gradually noticed weeks later. The Haiyuan earthquake altered the landscape of an entire province. Ridgelines shifted. Rivers changed course. The topography of northwestern China was rewritten in the space of a few minutes. Number 9. The 1556 Shanxi earthquake, January 23, 1556, China. We pause here because this entry holds a title that has not been taken from it in nearly 500 years. The earthquake that struck Shanxi province in central China in the early morning hours of January 23, 1556, remains, to this day, the deadliest earthquake in all of recorded human history. The estimated death toll, approximately 830,000 people. To put that in context, the entire population of San Francisco today is approximately 870,000. The Shanxi earthquake of 1556, in a single night, killed nearly every man, woman, and child who would today live in San Francisco, in one region of China, in one event. The magnitude is estimated at approximately 8.0. The destruction was amplified catastrophically by the housing structures of the time. Much of Shanxi's rural population lived in Yaodong, cave dwellings carved directly into the Loess cliffs. When those cliffs shook, the dwellings collapsed inward, and their inhabitants had nowhere to go. In some counties, contemporary records indicate that 60% of the population was killed. 60%. The land became unrecognizable. Entire geographic features were altered. Mountains slid. Rivers flooded from new blockages. The Shanxi earthquake sat undisturbed at the top of the deadliest earthquake list for 4.5 centuries, and it does not even crack the top half of this countdown. Let that settle for a moment. Number 8. The 1887 Yellow River flood, September to October, 1887, China. There is a reason the Yellow River has been called, throughout Chinese history, both the cradle of Chinese civilization and China's sorrow. For millennia, the communities of the North China Plain built their lives along its banks. And for millennia, those communities also built and reinforced levee systems, earthworks designed to contain the river's famously high sediment load, which causes the riverbed to rise slowly over centuries until the river runs along a ridge elevated above the surrounding landscape. By September 1887, the Yellow River was running, in some places, up to 20 meters above the surrounding plain. On September 28th, the levees at Huaiyang in Henan province failed. The river did not rise. It exploded outward. Within days, the floodwaters covered an area of approximately 130,000 square kilometers, a region roughly the size of Greece. It inundated 11 large towns and hundreds of villages. The death toll from drowning, disease, and the famine that followed is estimated between 900,000 and 2 million people. The range is wide because in that era, in that region, counting the dead was itself an act that required infrastructure, and the infrastructure had drowned. 2 million people, killed by a river that was, by that point in its history, practically waiting to overflow. A catastrophe centuries in the making, built slowly by silt, held back by earthwork, and then unleashed in an afternoon. We have now crossed the threshold of 1 million lives. We are only at number 8. From this point forward, the scale of what you are about to hear requires a different kind of attention. The disasters in the first half of this countdown were comprehensible. Enormous, yes. Heartbreaking, absolutely. But comprehensible. They had clear mechanisms. They had defined geographic footprints. They happened, and then they ended, and the world moved on. The events from number 7 downward do not end cleanly. They cascade. They trigger secondary catastrophes that dwarf the initial event. They alter climate systems, collapse food supplies, and in some cases, fundamentally redirect the course of human civilization in ways that historians are still mapping. Number 7. The 1931 China floods, July to November. 1931, Central China. The summer of 1931 was the culmination of 2 years of extraordinary weather extremes in central China. In 1929 and 1930, a severe drought had killed crops across the Yangtze and Huai River basins. Then, in the winter of 1930 to 1931, record snowfalls blanketed the mountains. In the spring of 1931, that snow melted, all of it, faster than usual. And then the summer monsoons arrived with extraordinary intensity. The Yangtze, Yellow, and Huai rivers, 3 of the largest river systems in Asia, flooded simultaneously. By August, the Yangtze River had risen to 30 meters above normal summer levels. The city of Wuhan was submerged underwater for 3 months. Crop fields across the most agriculturally productive region of China were buried under meters of sediment. The rice harvest, the food supply for hundreds of millions of people, was destroyed. The direct death toll from drowning was significant. The death toll from the cholera, typhoid, and dysentery epidemics that followed the floodwaters was larger. The death toll from the famine that emerged when the harvest failed was larger still. Total estimated deaths from the 1931 China floods, between 1 and 4 million people. The uncertainty in that number is itself a measure of the catastrophe. Mortality that wide in its range means that the counting system failed, that the death was so pervasive across so large an area for so long a duration that no authority could keep track of it. This is the deadliest flood in recorded human history. And we still have 6 entries left. Number 6. The 1815 Mount Tambora eruption, April 1815, Sumbawa Island, Indonesia. On the evening of April 10, 1815, the volcano known as Mount Tambora on the island of Sumbawa produced what geologists classify as a volcanic explosivity index 7 eruption, the largest volcanic eruption in recorded human history. The eruption killed approximately 71,000 people directly, but this entry is at number 6, not because of those 71,000 deaths. It is at number 6 because of what Tambora did to the atmosphere of the entire planet for the following 2 years. The eruption ejected approximately 160 cubic kilometers of ash, rock, and aerosol into the stratosphere. These particles circled the globe at high altitude, filtering sunlight. Temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped by an average of 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius the following year, a number that sounds modest until you understand what it means for agriculture. 1816 became known across 3 continents as the year without a summer. In New England, frost was recorded in every month of the year. In Europe, the summer of 1816 produced no meaningful harvest. In China, the summer monsoons failed. In India, the disruption of the normal weather pattern contributed to the beginning of the second cholera pandemic, which would kill millions over the following years. The famine triggered by the failed harvests of 1816 and 1817 killed an estimated 200,000 people in Europe alone. Across Asia, mortality from starvation and disease in the years following Tambora is estimated in the hundreds of thousands to low millions. A single geological event in Indonesia created a global food crisis visible from New England to China. And the Tambora eruption, the largest in recorded human history, is only number 6 on this list. Number 5. The 365 AD Mediterranean Mega Tsunami, July 21, 365 AD, Eastern Mediterranean. On the morning of July 21st in the year 365 AD, the seafloor beneath the eastern Mediterranean Sea lurched upward by approximately 10 meters along a fault beneath Crete, one of the most violent submarine earthquakes in the past 2,000 years. The tsunami it generated crossed the Mediterranean at catastrophic speed. The city of Alexandria, Egypt, at that moment one of the greatest cities in the world, the intellectual capital of the Roman Empire, home to an estimated 500,000 people, was struck by a wave that contemporary sources describe as lifting entire ships out of the harbor and depositing them 2 miles inland. According to the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who was alive at the time and documented the event extensively, thousands of people ran onto the exposed seafloor when the water first retreated, unaware that the withdrawal was the precursor to the wave, not its conclusion. When the water returned, it returned as a wall. The death toll in Alexandria alone is estimated in the tens of thousands. Across the Nile Delta, Libya, Greece, Cyprus, and the Adriatic coast, the cumulative death toll reached into the hundreds of thousands. But the 365 AD tsunami sits at number 5 on this list, not primarily because of its death toll, though that toll was enormous, but because of what it did to the infrastructure of the Eastern Roman Empire at a moment of profound political fragility. The event coincided with a period of imperial instability that historians identify as a critical threshold. The destruction of Alexandria's port infrastructure accelerated the city's long decline as the commercial center of the Mediterranean world. Trade networks that had functioned for 3 centuries were severed. The wave lasted minutes. Its consequences lasted centuries. Number 4. The 535 to 536 AD Mystery Catastrophe. Origin unknown. In the year 536 AD, something happened to the sky. It began in late 535 or early 536 and lasted 18 months. A veil of dust and ash settled in the upper atmosphere, so thick and so persistent that it reduced sunlight across the northern hemisphere by approximately 50% for a year and a half. Medieval chroniclers from Ireland to Constantinople wrote about it with the same bewildered horror. A Byzantine historian described the sun as giving light without warmth, like the moon. A priest in Italy wrote that the year was without brightness and the fruit did not ripen. Chinese court records noted that summer brought snow. In Peru, ice core records show a sudden, sharp temperature drop. In Greenland ice cores, a clear chemical signature marks the event precisely. Harvard medieval historian Michael McCormick, in a widely cited 2018 study called The Decade Beginning in 536 AD, the worst decade to be alive in all of human history. What caused it? The scientific consensus points to a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, possibly in North America, but the source has never been definitively identified. The eruption was followed in 540 AD by a second major volcanic event, compounding the atmospheric disruption. The consequences cascaded. Crops failed across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia for multiple consecutive years. Famine spread. Populations weakened, and into that weakened, malnourished, cold, starving world in 541 AD arrived the Plague of Justinian. The Plague of Justinian was the first recorded pandemic of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium we now call bubonic plague. Over the following 2 centuries, it killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people. Some estimates go higher. The connection between the 536 AD atmospheric event and the plague pandemic is not speculative. Famine weakens immune systems. Population displacement spreads disease. Rodent migration patterns, driven by agricultural collapse, create new human-animal contact zones where disease can jump. The 535 to 536 catastrophe did not directly kill tens of millions, but it created the precise conditions under which tens of millions then died. We are now in the final tier. 3 disasters remain, and everything you have heard so far, every death toll, every collapsed city, every failed harvest, exists within the era of recorded human history. What comes next does not. The final 3 entries on this countdown operate on a different scale entirely. They are events for which the word disaster feels inadequate, because their consequences are not measured in years or decades, but in centuries and millennia. They are events that did not merely damage civilizations, they unmade them. Number 3, the Minoan eruption of Thera, approximately 1600 BC, Aegean Sea. Sometime around 1600 BC, the precise date is debated, with estimates ranging from 1620 to 1530 BC. The volcanic island of Thera in the Aegean Sea destroyed itself. The eruption is classified as a volcanic explosivity index 7, comparable to Tambora, but its location, its timing, and its consequences placed it in an entirely different category of destruction. Thera was not a remote Indonesian island. It sat at the center of one of the most sophisticated trade networks of the ancient world, the Bronze Age Mediterranean, where the Minoan civilization of Crete had, for 5 centuries, maintained a commercial and cultural supremacy across the entire region. The eruption produced a caldera, a collapsed volcanic crater, approximately 11 kilometers wide and 400 meters deep. The island of Santorini, as it exists today, is the surviving rim of that caldera. What you see when you visit Santorini is the edge of a hole left by an explosion roughly 4 times more energetically powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. The tsunamis generated by the caldera collapse struck the northern coast of Crete within minutes. Archaeological. Excavations at the Minoan harbor towns of Pallaicastro and Amnisos found destruction layers consistent with a catastrophic wave, structures dismantled by water rather than by seismic activity, with artifacts characteristic of tsunami deposition. The Minoan civilization did not end on a single day, but the eruption of Thera appears to have dealt a devastating blow to the maritime infrastructure that sustained it. Its ports, its fleet, its palace economies, from which it never recovered. Within a century or 2 of the eruption, Mycenaean Greek influence had replaced Minoan dominance across the Aegean. More broadly, the climate effects of the Thera eruption, the ash clouds, the agricultural disruption, the disrupted weather patterns, have been linked by archaeologists and climate historians to the wider instability of the Late Bronze Age, a period in which, between roughly 1200 and 1150 BC, almost every major civilization around the eastern Mediterranean collapsed simultaneously. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse, an event so powerful it may have planted the seeds of a civilizational collapse that arrived 300 years later. Number 3, and still not the worst. Number 2, the Younger Dryas Impact Event, approximately 10,800 BC, global hold that thought about civilizations collapsing. Because number 2 on this list is an event most people have never heard of, never read about in school, and almost certainly never encountered in any previous documentary. Before there were civilizations to collapse, when our ancestors were small bands of hunter-gatherers scattered across a planet recovering from the last ice age, something happened, and it changed everything. Approximately 12,800 years ago, at the end of the geological period called the Pleistocene, the Earth experienced a sudden and dramatic cooling event. Within the span of decades, nearly instantaneous in geological time, Average temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by approximately 15 degrees Celsius. This event is called the Younger Dryas. Its cause is still debated. One prominent hypothesis, supported by the discovery of nanodiamonds, iridium anomalies, and microscopic spherules at geological boundary sites across 4 continents, proposes that a comet or asteroid fragmented and struck the Earth across multiple impact sites simultaneously. Whether the cause was extraterrestrial impact, a sudden shift in Atlantic Ocean circulation patterns, or some combination of factors, the consequences were catastrophic. The megafauna of North America, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, the American horse, the American camel, were almost entirely extinct within a few centuries of the Younger Dryas onset. The Clovis people, the earliest documented inhabitants of North America, whose stone tools have been found at thousands of sites across the continent, disappeared from the archaeological record completely at the Younger Dryas boundary. In Europe, the warming that had been gradually expanding human habitation northward reversed entirely. Human populations contracted sharply. Evidence of earlier settlements, cave art, tool caches, hunting sites, stops, replaced by centuries of near silence in the archaeological record. The Younger Dryas lasted approximately 1,200 years, 12 centuries of cold, dry, dust-laden climate that reset the baseline of human civilization before that civilization had even properly begun. It is number 2 because it functionally ended the world as it existed and remade it, and almost no one knows it happened. But everything described until now, every earthquake, every flood, every volcanic winter, every collapsed civilization, every dark sky, exists, in a sense, in the shadow of number 1. And number 1 is not a metaphor. Number 1. The Toba supervolcano eruption, approximately 74,000 years ago. Northern Sumatra, Indonesia. 74,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand years, which is as precise as we can be at that distance, the volcano beneath what is now Lake Toba, in the northern Sumatra region of Indonesia, erupted. Not in the way volcanoes erupt in documentaries, not with lava flows and ash clouds that ground flights for a week. Lake Toba today is 100 kilometers long, 30 kilometers wide, and 500 meters deep. It is the largest volcanic lake on Earth. It is also the caldera, the collapsed remnant, of the largest eruption in the past 25 million years of this planet's geological history. The Toba supervolcanic eruption ejected approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. For comparison, Mount Tambora, the largest eruption in recorded human history, the eruption that caused the year without a summer, the eruption that is number 6 on this list, ejected approximately 160 cubic kilometers. Toba ejected 17 times more material than Tambora. The ash field from Toba has been found in geological deposits across South Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, and East Africa. In India, ash layers up to 6 meters deep have been identified. In the deep ocean floor of the Bay of Bengal, the Toba ash layer is a clearly visible horizon in a sediment core, a thin gray line that says, "Here is where the world changed." The volcanic winter triggered by Toba is estimated to have lasted between 6 and 10 years. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by an average of 15 degrees Celsius or more during its peak. And this is the part of this story that should make you stop and pay full attention. The genetic record of the human species contains what geneticists call a population bottleneck, a point at which the diversity of human DNA narrows dramatically, indicating that the entire species was reduced to an extremely small number of breeding individuals. That bottleneck is dated to approximately 70 to 80,000 years ago. The genetic estimates for the size of the surviving human population during and immediately after the Toba eruption range from a low of approximately 1,000 breeding pairs, 2,000 individuals, to a high of approximately 10,000 individuals, 10,000 people, on an entire planet. To put that in context, there are more people in attendance at an average professional football game than there were human beings alive in the aftermath of the Toba eruption. The entire human species, the sum total of all human experience and potential, was reduced to what might be a few scattered groups, huddled in refugia, areas with enough residual warmth and food to sustain life, while the sky above them was the color of ash, and the sun gave light without warmth, and winter lasted for years. The Toba bottleneck is documented in the genomes of every living human being on Earth. Every person watching this video, every person who will ever watch this video, carries in their DNA the signature of an event that almost ended us. We nearly did not survive. We carry it with us still,